Dave Grohl, the man the world once believed to be the happiest face in rock, has in truth spent his entire life carrying wounds he himself needed decades to finally name. Behind that fireworks bright smile lies a childhood fractured by divorce, years spent sleeping in vans just to chase punk music, the shock of watching Nirvana collapse in tragedy, and a grief that never cooled over the death of Kurt Cobain. But what made Dave Grohl an icon was never the fact that he survived it all. It was the way he stood back up, rebuilt his life from ashes, and turned pain into music that touched the most fragile corners of the human heart. More than 3 decades after the chaos of Seattle, Dave finally feels calm enough to speak about the darkness of Nirvana, a brilliant yet cracked light that pushed an entire generation to the thin line between genius and despair. And in that journey, we discover another truth, that the people who seem the strongest are often the ones who have stood back up so many times. They no longer remember how often they fell. This isn't just the story of a legend from 2 eras of rock. It is the journey of a heart once shattered, yet still able to beat its drums and move forward. The journey of an artist who was never meant to become a legend, but became one simply because he survived things that would have broken almost anyone. And to understand how a man could carry so many wounds and still keep moving forward, we have to return to the beginning, where the first cracks appeared, quiet but powerful enough to shape the rest of his life. Dave Grohl was born in 1969 into a middle-class family in Warren, Ohio. Not poor enough to struggle for every meal, but never stable enough to give a child a fully intact sense of home. When Dave was only 7, his parents divorced. The small house that once echoed with voices suddenly became an empty chamber, a place where he and his sister had to learn to grow up with silence rather than explanations. His mother, an English teacher, gathered her 2 children and moved to Virginia, beginning a new life no one was prepared for. It was also when Dave first saw his mother working longer hours, coming home exhausted, sometimes sitting wordlessly in the kitchen under the weight of financial pressure and the disappointment of a shattered marriage. And perhaps that was the moment that planted in Dave the conviction he would repeat for the rest of his life. Protect your family at all costs. Don't let anyone walk away again. At an age when other kids were busy chasing soccer balls, Dave already knew what it felt like to lose a shoulder to lean on, a compass, and, most painfully, a father who was supposed to be there every day. His father still existed on paper, but had almost vanished from Dave's actual life. They barely spoke throughout Dave's adolescence. Father and son lived on 2 different frequencies. His father wanted him to follow a path of academics, politics, journalism, something structured, respectable. But Dave was loud, restless, bursting with energy, always written up for not sitting still or asking too many questions. That quiet but profound mismatch stretched on for years, becoming a scratch inside him that never quite healed. At school, Dave didn't belong anywhere. He was small, mischievous, talkative, and not nearly cool enough to fit into any group. He was mocked, picked on, isolated. He became the kid teachers sympathized with, classmates avoided, and life pushed around as if unsure where he was supposed to fit. In 7th grade, Dave had to transfer schools to escape the bullying. And that unwanted detour opened the first doorway to the thing that would save his entire life. During the summer, Dave turned 13. He and his sister Lisa were sent to live with relatives in Illinois. It became the summer that rewrote his destiny, the summer of punk rock. A cousin introduced him to Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, Minor Threat, music so free it felt dangerous, raw as a punch but honest as a confession. That summer, Dave learned guitar, experimented with drums, took his first puffs of weed, and, above all, realized there was an entirely different world outside the classroom chair and the expectations pressing down on him. When he returned to Virginia, Dave was no longer the same kid. He became a sleepwalker in class, uninterested in homework, unmoved by his father's dreams for him. His mind was now consumed by music, by drums, by riffs, by screams. In its strange, messy way, punk rock gave Dave something his father never could: a sense of belonging. He didn't come to the drums through lessons or formal training. It all began when his mother brought home old cassette tapes, and Dave played the same passages over and over as if trying to fill a void words couldn't reach. Sometimes passion isn't born from inspiration, but from a sorrow without a name. For Dave, every strike of the drumstick was an attempt to hear himself inside a house that had grown too large. The tension between Dave and his father didn't fade. His father, a strict, disciplined man, could not accept that his son wanted to become a musician. Yet no amount of disapproval could keep Dave away from the drums. He learned by ear, by instinct, by the frustrated exhale after every mistake, and by the wild excitement of a boy who had finally found the one thing that made him feel alive. Those early days were not music lessons. They were survival lessons. Proof that sometimes all a child needs to keep from drifting away is a drum kit and 2 sticks. Music did not come to Dave through any glamorous doorway. It began in damp Virginia garages, where he and a few friends formed Mission Impossible, a teenage punk band that played with instinct far more than technique. Their first shows had no stage lights, no cheering fans, just the smell of spilled beer on the floor and a handful of curious onlookers watching as if they were seeing a group of kids experiment with something far too loud. But it was in those wobbly, half-drunken nights that Dave learned one essential skill: drumming, as if it were the last language he had left. When Mission Impossible fell apart, Dave immediately threw himself into Dane Bromwich, another hardcore band, even more chaotic, more unhinged. He wasn't thinking about a career. He simply needed a place loud enough to drown out the silences he knew too well. And then, the first real opportunity appeared. Scream, one of Washington, D.C.'s most respected punk bands, needed a new drummer. Dave, just 17, showed up to the audition and lied that he was 20, just to get on the road, leave Virginia behind, and live at the rhythm of his own heartbeat. A few weeks later, he dropped out of school. No diploma, no backup plan. Just a kid climbing into Scream's battered van and stepping into the life he vaguely called touring. Those years on the road with Scream were both brutal and formative. Dave slept on warehouse floors, borrowed couches, or inside a gasoline-scented van that always seemed to leak. Meals were instant noodles, leftovers after gigs, or whatever he could buy with the last few dollars in his pocket. Scream played anywhere that welcomed punk. Grimy bars, tiny cafes, cluttered basement venues, clubs where the audience screamed either from excitement or because the music was unbearably loud. But that instability made Dave grow in ways no book could teach, learning to fix his own drums, learning to survive when money vanished, learning to stay grounded even when the band faltered, and most importantly, learning that he was living a life no one could take from him. Then, one day, that life collapsed without warning. In the middle of a European tour in 1990, bassist Skeeter Thompson suddenly quit. Without a bassist, Scream disintegrated instantly. Dave found himself standing inside an airport with nothing but a suitcase, a drum kit, a few spare dollars, and nowhere in the world to return to. It was the first free fall of his life, so bitter he thought music had abandoned him. But the moments that feel like endings are sometimes just the hinge of fate turning. Buzz Osborne, the leader of Melvins, familiar with Dave from the underground scene, saw something Dave didn't. Potential strong enough to shake a band on the verge of creating something huge. Buzz handed him a cassette tape and said 2 guys in Seattle were looking for a drummer. Those 2 men were Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic. Dave arrived in Seattle with no expectations. He walked into the rehearsal space, a small room, thick with cigarette smoke, amps buzzing softly, and played a few songs. No formalities, no scoring sheets, no compliments. Just Kurt watching Dave with the recognition only real musicians have for one another. The sense that the person who just walked in could change their future. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered lived in the drums, and Dave knew from that first moment that he had found a real home. Not a family, not a plan, but the one place where his internal chaos made perfect sense. A few weeks later, Dave Grohl joined Nirvana. Not because he thought the band would become legendary, not because he saw fame coming. He joined Nirvana because he had nothing left to lose, and sometimes the people with nothing to lose end up creating the things that define an entire generation. Dave stepped into Nirvana not knowing he was only one drum beat away from the musical revolution of the 1990s. The band was still a small name in the alternative scene, playing in rundown clubs to a few hundred people, the future impossible to predict. But months later, when the 3 of them walked into Sound City to record Nevermind, something beyond their control began to take shape. Kurt's simplicity, Chris's quiet steadiness, and Dave's explosive, storm-like drumming fused into a strange compound, raw, honest, and powerful in a way none of them fully understood. When Nevermind dropped in 1991, everything detonated like a cultural landslide. Within weeks, the songs recorded on that old analog equipment spread across the world, toppling charts, pushing pop and glam metal to the sidelines, and igniting what would become the grunge movement. Smells Like Teen Spirit, with Dave's drums sounding like he was trying to break the air itself, became a battle cry for an entire generation. Lithium, In Bloom, Breed. Those songs didn't just play, they screamed alongside youth itself. And from an unknown punk drummer, Dave Grohl was thrown straight into the center of a firestorm, one both brilliant and destructive. But behind the stage lights was another story, a story of pressure, exhaustion, and a frontman slowly slipping beyond reach. Nevermind's success dragged Nirvana into an unrelenting cycle, non-stop interviews, endless shows, intercontinental flights on repeat. Dave, who had once slept in vans and eaten scraps, suddenly tasted fame. But it felt like a spring coiling tighter around his ribs. And Kurt disappeared into himself. Fame wasn't saving him. It was exposing every wound he had ever tried to hide. Heroin became the only blanket warm enough to cover the rawness inside him. And Dave, without saying a word, understood he was watching his friend drift farther away each day. Some nights Dave sat behind the drum kit watching Kurt lean into the microphone, voice thinning, hands trembling. And in the split-second precision of every beat, Dave would be struck by a terrifying thought that one day he might be asked to play the drums at a ceremony that should never exist, the funeral of his closest friend. In early March 1994, Nirvana played Munich, their final show. Kurt was too weak to sing, his voice ragged, breath short, eyes floating somewhere far beyond the stage. Exhaustion soaked the entire room, as if everything had begun collapsing from within and no one knew how to stop it. None of them realized they were witnessing their last moments together. On April 5, 1994, when news of Kurt's suicide broke, Dave Grohl caved inward. No screaming, no tears, just the suffocating silence of a man who had lost not only a friend, but a piece of his soul and his purpose. He disappeared from the public eye for months, cut off all contact, didn't touch a drum, didn't turn on an amp, didn't want to hear a single sound. The music that once saved him from a broken childhood had become a knife twisting in the wound. And in those darkest days, Dave considered walking away from it forever. But he didn't know that from what looked like an ending, a new chapter, painful but brilliant, was about to begin. In the months following Kurt's death, Dave moved through life like a ghost. He avoided Seattle, avoided friends, and avoided music. The very thing that had once been his oxygen but now felt like the cruelest reminder of everything he had lost. But one morning, when he saw his drum kit covered in dust, Dave understood one thing. Either he touched it, or he would disappear forever. He had blamed music for taking his friend away, but it was also the only thing strong enough to pull him back to life. So Dave walked into the studio, alone, with no expectations, no plan, and a grief he still didn't know how to name. Inside the small room at Robert Lang Studios, Dave played every instrument himself: drums, guitars, bass, vocals, as if he were stitching together the fragments of his shattered self. No producer's spotlight, no guiding voice behind the glass. Each song he recorded wasn't meant for release. It was a test to see whether he still existed inside music at all. The result was 15 raw, honest tracks, songs that sounded like a man crawling from darkness toward anything that resembled light. Dave called the project Foo Fighters, a name that sounded like a real band, even though at that moment no band existed. It was just one man trying to save himself. But those songs were far more powerful than Dave expected. They spread. They resonated. They were loved. To many, the album felt like a rebirth delivered without announcement. When Foo Fighters was released in 1995, most listeners didn't even know it had been made entirely by Dave alone. What they heard, what they felt, was sincerity, something increasingly rare in a rock scene becoming glossier by the day. That response forced Dave to turn Foo Fighters into a real band. With Pat Smear, Nate Mendel, and William Goldsmith on board, Dave entered a new role for the first time: frontman and leader, something he never was in Nirvana. But every light casts a shadow. During the recording of their second album, The Color and the Shape, conflict erupted. Dave, overwhelmed by perfectionism and still haunted by the responsibility he carried after Nirvana's collapse, secretly re-recorded all the drum parts William Goldsmith had played. Not to belittle anyone, but because Dave wasn't ready to entrust the band's heartbeat to anyone but himself. When the truth came out, Goldsmith left. The press called it Foo Fighters' first internal scandal. Dave was labeled controlling, obsessive, but when seen in context, a man who had lost his best friend, who felt he had to rebuild an entire life from nothing, you begin to understand. Sometimes harshness doesn't come from ego, but from fear that everything will fall apart again. And yet, from the storm, the music exploded even stronger. The Color and the Shape, 1997, became the band's defining album, not just for its sound, but for its emotional honesty. Everlong, written during one of the most turbulent chapters in Dave's life, quickly became one of the most beloved rock tracks of the 1990s. My Hero rang out like a tribute to ordinary people carrying extraordinary resilience. Monkey Wrench and Walking After You proved that Foo Fighters weren't Nirvana's shadow, but a fully formed organism with its own spirit, its own lungs, its own fire. After The Color and the Shape, Foo Fighters didn't just survive, they grew, matured, and entered a new era of rock where the music was no longer a cry for help, but a declaration. After years of loss, Dave Grohl no longer ran from his past. He began facing it. And from that confrontation came some of the most important work of his career. Wasting Light, 2011, was the turning point. No high-tech studios, no digital tools. Dave dragged the entire band into the garage of his Los Angeles home, insisting the album be recorded entirely on analog tape, just like Nirvana's early days in the old studios of the 90s. It wasn't a sonic preference, it was a rebellion against the cold perfection of the digital era. Wasting Light was rough, human, breathing, an album built on the belief that music only matters when it's made by heart, not by software. The world responded with absolute respect. Wasting Light earned 5 Grammy nominations and won the biggest rock award of the year. Foo Fighters were no longer the band after Nirvana. They became a pillar of modern rock, one of the last groups still holding the raw essence of guitars, drums, and real sweat. But Dave Grohl didn't want to be remembered only as the drummer of a myth or the leader of a successful rock band. He wanted to understand why American music carried so many souls, and that journey created Sonic Highways, 2014. It was more than an album. It was a cross-country documentary. Chicago, Austin, Nashville, Seattle, each city a cultural heartbeat, a collective memory, a different strand of musical DNA. Dave stepped into the role of a true storyteller, listening to old musicians relive their past, standing where legends were born, trying to rewrite the history of rock through his own lens. Sonic Highways proved Dave wasn't just someone who made sound. He knew how to tell stories through music. Each song was a chapter, each city a layer of sediment, and the entire album a map of American emotion assembled from 8 dusty human fragments. And remarkably, even as Foo Fighters rode their greatest wave of success, Dave refused to stand still. He launched countless side projects as if music were a river that must never stop flowing. Them Crooked Vultures, the supergroup featuring Dave Grohl, Josh Homme, Queens of the Stone Age, and John Paul Jones, Led Zeppelin, showed that rock could still explode when 3 different hearts beat in unison. Probot was a love letter to the 80s metal Dave grew up on, dark, raw, and authentic, like the boy he once was. Then came Sound City, 2013, the documentary that made critics bow. Dave didn't just tell the story of a rundown California studio, he told the story of an era. The era of tape machines, of one-take recordings, of legends who were real instead of manufactured by marketing. The film earned widespread praise and became, for many, a love letter to analog heritage. And What Drives Us, 2021, the documentary Dave directed, reminded new generations that rock wasn't born on grand stages but in battered vans, where bands slept beside their amps, survived on cheap snacks, and played bar shows no one remembered. It was the same road Dave once lived, and now retold as a torchbearer. No matter the project, Dave Grohl had only one mission: to remind the world that music isn't a product. It is a life. But the deeper Dave stepped into music, the more he realized there were things he couldn't fix with drum beats alone. His personal life, something he had never truly learned how to care for, began to fracture just as his career was finding a fragile new light. In the early years of Foo Fighters, when the pain of losing Kurt still hovered in the corners of every room, Dave married Jennifer Youngblood, a young photographer who had walked beside him through his most uncertain months. Jennifer arrived at a time when Dave was trying to rebuild his entire life through music, and because of that, they entered marriage with too many unfilled spaces between them. Dave was a man freshly escaped from the wreckage of Nirvana, struggling to pull a newborn band into orbit while carrying a quiet fear of not knowing where he was headed. Jennifer tried to hold together a small home for both of them, but the harder she tried, the more Dave seemed to slip out of her hands. They loved each other in the way young people often do, fiercely, honestly, but also clumsily and without the tools to truly understand one another. The endless touring, the late-night recording sessions, the invisible weight of carrying the name Foo Fighters on his shoulders. All of it turned Dave into someone who was physically present but emotionally absent. And the remnants of rebellion from his youth pushed him toward choices he later admitted were mistakes. His infidelity left Jennifer deeply wounded, and in 1997, their already fragile marriage collapsed after only a few years. When Jennifer left, Dave didn't just lose a partner. He lost another part of himself, one he had never known how to protect. And in that moment, the relationships around him began to tremble too. Pat Smear, the bandmate who had helped Dave climb out of Nirvana's ruins to form Foo Fighters, quit the band for nearly a decade, simply because he couldn't bear seeing his close friend hurt by the man who was supposed to love her. It was the first time Dave Grohl realized that success doesn't save anyone. Music can fill stadiums, but it can't repair the spaces you break yourself. And in the midst of losing both love and friendship, Dave was forced to learn a lesson he never learned in his youth. To build something that lasts, you need more than passion. You need maturity. After his marriage to Jennifer Youngblood fell apart, Dave entered what he later called the most limbo-like years of my life. Famous yet wounded, celebrated yet lost, unsure of what he was running from or toward. And it was in this emotional gray zone that Louise Post appeared. Louise, the voice of Veruca Salt, was more than a talented singer. She was the kind of woman who could see through the loud exterior of a rocker and notice the things he never put into words. They met at a moment when both were standing at their own crossroads, Dave emerging from a cracked marriage, Louise rising with her band, yet finding the world too noisy to hear her own heart clearly. Their love came quickly, intensely, with the air of two people trying to lean on each other to make up for their individual emptiness. For Dave, Louise was the one person who didn't need him to be the leader of Foo Fighters or the survivor of Nirvana. For Louise, Dave was someone who listened, someone who could touch a sorrow without making it worse. But because both came into the relationship with wounds still open, their love carried a shadow from the start. Dave was still living inside an overwhelming rhythm, recordings, interviews, constant tours, and the darkness of his past clung to him so tightly that he couldn't give Louise the stability she needed. Small misunderstandings, nights spent waiting for replies that never came, unspoken hurts, all of it piled up. In 1998, Dave broke up with Louise over the phone. No warning, no face-to-face conversation. A rushed decision he later carried like a scar. Louise was so devastated that the performance she gave right after became a bitter memory, her voice shaking not from nerves, but from disappointment. That ending didn't just give Dave the reputation of a bad rock star boyfriend. It forced him to look in the mirror and see something he had avoided for years. He was repeating the very kind of hurt he had endured as a child. Leaving, disappearing, saying goodbye without saying goodbye. But the wounds from Jennifer and Louise didn't disappear overnight. They clung to Dave like the stubborn dust of youth, something that made him brilliant on stage, yet awkward, hesitant, and even frightened when faced with relationships that required real maturity. In 2001, on an evening that seemed utterly ordinary at the Sunset Marquee, fate appeared in the form of a young woman working in media, Jordan Blum. At first, Dave noticed something in her he never found during the chaotic 90s: calm, composure, sincerity. She wasn't an artist, didn't come from the loud world Dave had lived in for so long, and that was exactly what made him stop. For the first time in years, Dave felt he didn't have to prove anything to anyone. They began seeing each other quietly. Dinners, Long conversations that stretched until sunrise, moments where Dave finally got to be a man trying to find his way, not a rock star forced to keep everyone laughing. Jordan didn't try to heal him, she simply listened, quietly showing Dave that sometimes peace is just someone who knows when to stay silent. By 2003, they wrote their names on the same page of life with a simple wedding in Los Angeles. No extravagance, no spectacle, just family and a few close friends. Dave stepped from the blazing stage lights into marriage with one desire: to never repeat his father's mistakes, to not walk away, to not disappear, to not create the kind of void a child would carry for a lifetime. Their children arrived like beams of light Dave had never dared dream of. Violet, born in 2006, became his musical companion from the start, later joining him on stage. Harper came in 2009, gentler, quieter, and made Dave understand for the first time what it meant to lose sleep over a child's slight fever. Then Ophelia, born in 2014, completed the family, turning their home into a world that finally felt whole. But happiness never comes without its own trials. Endless touring, recurring injuries, including the broken leg in Gothenburg in 2015, and the pressure of sustaining the entire Foo Fighters empire left Dave exhausted, sometimes returning home with just enough energy to sit silently on the floor. Jordan saw everything: the fatigue, the fear, the lingering sense that he had never fully escaped Nirvana's shadow. There were nights when they argued because Dave was away too much, because he couldn't stop long enough to breathe, because the rock and roll whirlwind kept pulling him away. But unlike the past, this time Dave didn't run. He didn't shut down. He didn't choose silence the way his father once did. He learned to come back. He learned to apologize. He learned to stand in the kitchen and cook dinner the day he returned from tour. He learned to put his family before the spotlight, before the album deadlines, before that endless hunger inside him that always whispered, "Just one more project." And Jordan, through her quiet resilience, became the anchor that allowed Dave Grohl to live up to the promise he made as a child: to build a family that doesn't break, that doesn't walk away, that doesn't let silence swallow a child's world again. If Nirvana gave Dave a wound, then Foo Fighters gave him a life. But it was Jordan and their 3 daughters who taught him that sometimes happiness doesn't come from the thunder of drums, but from the small moments inside a peaceful home, where a man who once believed he would never know how to love the right way finally found his way back. Loss has never truly left Dave Grohl, and just when he finally had a family, a foundation, and the stability he had longed for since childhood, life opened a new chapter of trials. His mother, Virginia Grohl, the woman who had stood quietly behind him from the days he was just a kid, tapping rhythms on a school desk, to the moment he became a generational rock icon, passed away in 2023. It wasn't just the death of a mother. It was the end of the deepest bond in Dave's life, the only person who saw him before the world ever saw Dave Grohl. Confronting that loss, Dave walked into the studio and wrote The Teacher, a long, heavy composition that felt like a farewell he never had the chance to say out loud. It became the emotional core of But Here We Are, an album conceived entirely from grief, each note pulling him back to childhood, to the place where Virginia was the only safe thing he knew. But sorrow does not wait its turn. Just 1 year earlier, in 2022, Dave collapsed internally when Taylor Hawkins, his best friend, his bandmate, the second heartbeat of Foo Fighters, died in Colombia. The shock shattered the band and forced Foo Fighters to halt all activities. While Dave fell into a darkness he thought he had learned to outrun during the Nirvana years. The 2 tribute concerts in London and Los Angeles were not just farewells to Taylor. They were moments where the whole world watched Dave face a pain hauntingly similar to losing Kurt Cobain. Only this time, he wasn't young anymore, and he no longer had the strength to run from grief the way he once did. When Shane Hawkins, Taylor's son, sat behind the drum kit to play My Hero, Dave bowed his head. And in that moment, we saw a man who had lost too much to still believe that time could heal everything. But life wasn't done testing him. In 2025, the media reported that Dave had a daughter born outside his marriage, a revelation that could have become a full-blown scandal for any public figure. Dave didn't deny it, didn't dodge it, didn't hide behind a polished image to save himself. He acknowledged it, took responsibility, and protected the child with the instinct of someone who had spent his own childhood living in the void left by a father's absence. That honesty prevented the public from turning against him. Instead, they recognized something. Dave Grohl isn't perfect, but he is honest. Amid all these upheavals, Dave's body began to push back. Decades of playing rock at deafening volume left him nearly deaf in one ear, with chronic tinnitus that made the world around him hum with invisible frequencies. Dave had to learn to hear music through sound memory, imagining every beat, every cymbal hit, every layer of distortion in his mind like a map he had carried for decades. For a drummer, it was almost a cruel sentence. But Dave, as always, kept going, kept playing, kept standing on stage, as if all the losses, all the ringing in his ears, all the darkness had never touched the place where music still held him together. Dave Grohl does not stop at pain. He turns it into the material he needs to keep living. And that truth becomes clearest in the next chapter of his life, where music, family, and loss intertwine so tightly they can no longer be separated. In 2023, Foo Fighters returned with But Here We Are, an album that critics and fans alike hailed as their best work in 15 years. Not because of its production, not because of technical choices, but because Dave Grohl's grief had become the most honest language in the record. 2 consecutive losses, Taylor Hawkins and his mother Virginia, seemed to crystallize into layers of sound that were both fierce and fragile. Tracks like Rescued and The Teacher didn't play like songs. They trembled like the ragged breaths of a man trying to keep himself from falling apart. And for the first time, Foo Fighters were no longer just a rock band that survived storms. They were a band learning how to hurt together in order to move forward. In that rebirth, something beautiful emerged. Violet Grohl. Dave's eldest daughter at 17 began touring with him, appearing in Show Me How with a voice both soft and weightless, like a thread anchoring Dave in the middle of his grief. She wasn't appearing as Dave Grohl's daughter, but as an extension of the family story, where old wounds were no longer hidden, but transformed into something hearable, something shared. For Dave, every duet with her was a different kind of healing, proof that the cycle of abandonment, loss, and heartbreak from his childhood had finally been broken. In 2024, Foo Fighters continued touring, but Dave no longer threw himself into relentless schedules the way he had in his youth. He cut back on shows, chose his dates carefully, and prioritized time at home with Jordan and their 3 daughters. No longer a man running from the past through work, Dave entered a phase of life where stage and family existed on the same scale. Fewer shows, but deeper ones. Every performance felt like a tribute to those who were gone and a promise to those who remained. By 2025, Foo Fighters brought Coachella to complete silence when Dave walked on stage with an orchestral version of Everlong. The song had already been the band's soul, but in that sweeping arrangement, Everlong felt reborn, deeper, sadder, richer with story. Critics called it the second life of Foo Fighters, while fans said it was the first time they heard Everlong not through their ears, but through Dave's memories. Friendship, loss, love, and all the words he never had the chance to say. That night at Coachella only confirmed one thing. Dave Grohl no longer needs to chase the times. He is writing the next chapter in his own way, slower, deeper, and perhaps the most honest chapter of his life. After more than 3 decades of walking through pain, what Dave Grohl leaves behind in music goes far beyond cold numbers, sales, awards, chart positions. His legacy lies in endurance, a rare quality in a world where even legends can be swallowed by exhaustion, addiction, or despair. From Nirvana to Foo Fighters, from sleeping in vans to selling out Wembley twice, from feeling betrayed by music after Kurt Cobain's death to picking up a guitar and writing Everlong as an act of resurrection. Every turning point in Dave's life is marked not by the pursuit of glory, but by the will to survive. His legacy also lives in the way Dave brings music back to its true purpose, a place where people say what they cannot say out loud. In Sound City, he resurrected the spirit of analog recording to preserve the roughness of real emotion. In Sonic Highways, he became a traveler searching for the soul of every city, treating music as living history. In But Here We Are, he turned loss into musical chapters capable of healing listeners who never knew Taylor Hawkins or Virginia Grohl. And in every tour, every stage, every moment he performed on a throne after breaking his leg, Dave has always proven that rock isn't about screaming. It's about endurance. But perhaps Dave Grohl's greatest legacy isn't on stage at all. It's the way he broke the cycle of his own childhood, becoming the father he once longed for, giving Violet, Harper, and Ophelia a home he never had, and turning his pain into lessons instead of generational wounds. Many call Dave Grohl the nicest man in rock. But looking at his entire journey, the truer definition might be this: the man who chose kindness as his only way to survive. And in the end, Dave Grohl's story doesn't begin with glory, but with fractures. It doesn't continue through luck, but through rising again and again. He never tried to become a legend. It was his sheer will to survive that turned him into one. In an era where music changes constantly, where trends overtake each other by the day, and where audiences forget faster than ever, Dave Grohl still stands, held together by a heart once shattered, yet never willing to stop beating. If you've stayed with this story to the very end, leave an emoji below as a small tribute to those who turned pain into something beautiful. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us for more real-life journeys, where music, sorrow, and resilience meet to create something nothing else can replace.